Hi, everyone. Welcome to Candid, where we talk to everyday people about their relationship struggles, what they learned, and most importantly, how they moved forward. So today's topic has to do with cultural differences in relationships and also making sure that you know everything you need and want to know before jumping into one. And so I have my guest Jackie here today, who is a jack of all trades. She is a podcaster, baker, and photographer. And Jackie, thank you for coming to share your stories with us today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, something that I found intriguing that you had said to me about your past relationship, and just to give people a little backstory, you were previously married. Both you and your ex-husband are culturally Chinese, right? Your background.
Correct.
And so when you guys got into your relationship, it's my understanding that you probably didn't really foresee a whole lot of the cultural differences that would play a role in your relationship, right? Like, because you're both pretty like Americanized in
Correct.
some senses,
Yes.
right? And so one thing that you had said, which can kind of serve as our jumping off point for our discussion, is from that relationship, you said, I learned how to ask the right questions. And it's my responsibility to know all I need to know for me and not someone else's job to make sure I know. So tell us the role that asking questions has played, or either not asking questions has played in your past relationship.
Well, speaking to directly to marriage, which is what I'm going to talk about as far as asking the right questions, is just to make sure that one, you're not afraid to ask questions, because I feel like, and maybe that was for myself too, I was afraid to dig too deep. Sometimes when it's like, oh, you're asking too many questions, and it may make the person feel like you don't trust them and you might be nosy, or maybe it's none of your business. But, when it comes to a marriage, it's all your business. So it's definitely up to you to make sure that you ask all the right questions. For example, for me in particular, because of the way, the reason that we got divorced was because of really money and ownership of the house that we were living in. I didn't ask the first question, which was, ownership. Who has ownership of this house? Because if anyone's listened to my podcast, they know that it was gifted to us by his parents. So I didn't do my due diligence, I feel, in making sure. So who has ownership now? Is it us? Is it them? Just to make sure to ask those very, they might be uncomfortable questions, but they need to be asked. And you have to talk about that when you're coming together and getting married, the finances. And the house was the biggest issue because, you both live there, you're paying for it. So I feel like that was the first thing I didn't ask. And that just led to a whole slew of miscommunication, non-communication, and just, kind of tumbleweeds into where I am today.
Yeah, I think finances is definitely a kind of walking on eggshells topic that a lot of people struggle with communicating openly and really voicing concerns and questions. And so I don't think that you're alone there for sure, especially in a situation like you said, that's pretty interesting. What are the details around being gifted a house? I would have not know the first thing about that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And of course, you're not thinking of divorce when you enter a marriage, so
no.
it might not have occurred to you to even think about asking or digging deeper. Um, but I think you made also a good point, is what is your comfort level with digging deeper? Sometimes I think people might want to just like avoid it and not want to make waves. And maybe you feel like you're being ungrateful because it is such a large gift, right? And it's like, well, why are you asking all these questions? Someone's giving you a house. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, I felt like, it was like that. But then part of it was my ex-husband. He made it a point to like always remind me, because originally we were going to pay the deposit back. We were going to we weren't going to take it completely as a gift. We were going to pay the deposit back. And then a couple years down the road, when we got married, he said, oh, my parents said we don't have to gift it. I mean, we don't have to pay it back anymore. So it's 100% a gift. So I was like, oh, so you become, you feel like so grateful and thankful that if you ask any more questions, it would seem to them the opposite, like you're not grateful, like you said. So it just kind of stuck that way. But he also kept reminding me, like every time we painted or bought a new piece of furniture, oh, this is for our house. Our house was very much brought up throughout our entire marriage. It's like he was almost trying to make me believe that it's our house, because it was very much the contrary when everything was revealed. But he did constantly say our house, our house. So I never felt like I had to dig. I never felt that way. I
Sure.
was, trusted him and thought that it's all good.
Right. Yeah, sure. And so to tell us a little bit about your backstory with your ex-husband and how you guys kind of you moved pretty quickly,
Yeah.
right? And were there any other questions at the time? Because kind of, as you mentioned, feeling that pressure or unspoken pressure to not ask more questions about the family giving you a house, or were there other things that you didn't really want to or didn't feel comfortable like digging deeper regarding his family that then started being revealed to you over time?
Well, it was like you said, it was quick. We moved in less than 3 months of knowing each other, and it was a whirlwind romance. Every girl's kind of fantasy, like this is the person that was meant to be for me. So when I moved to San Francisco, I just started off not asking very many questions, because I'm living in their parents' house temporarily until our house was fully renovated, and it was rented out at the time. So we had to wait for the people that were staying there to essentially move out. So that's why the time period of a year I ended up staying in his parents' house. That's why. So things just took a lot longer than we had anticipated in the very beginning. But I guess I didn't ask questions as far as how is this household run? What is your mom like? What is she not like? I mean, how should I be living downstairs in your in-law? I never once asked what I should do. What do you expect of me? What does she expect of me? I never asked any of those questions. I just followed his lead basically, and just kind of kept to myself, kept on the down low, and just didn't cause too much, commotion. And I
Sure.
felt like if I just was quiet, that, it would be okay and the time would pass. But, as we all know, things come up all the time. And a lot of the friction or a lot of the upset was just because we never actually sat down and talked about, like, even with his mother, my ex-mother-in-law, we never sat down and talked about, like, hey, this is how it's going to go, or this is what I would expect if you're going to be living here for a year. Just very open and honestly, we never had that conversation. So it was very much like, if she didn't like something, she would go tell him, and then he would go tell me, and then it would just cause like this negative invisible barrier around everybody, where you're on eggshells all the time. And that
Right.
was like that for the entire year up until we moved, the wedding. Everything just was a building layer of awkwardness, I feel.
I think
And
that's such a great point of knowing, first of all, what your own expectations are, and then having that conversation with your partner about what their expectations are. And in your case, you have numerous other people being brought into the mix, right? Meaning his mother and the extended family. And so not knowing their expectations, also, I can see where that would place a lot of extra stress or even miscommunications. So can I ask you, were there any cultural differences? For example, you and I were talking before, and you mentioned that in the Chinese culture, for some families, there are these ideologies or more like traditional ideas that remain in the family. And so for people who aren't really familiar with those ideals, can you just kind of highlight what some of the ones were that maybe you had not been expecting, or that kind of shone through in the relationship?
Yeah, for me in particular, of course, it started with the living together. And because in Chinese culture, you want to be married before you live together. And I'm sure there are a lot of other cultures that would prefer you to be married before you live together. So for the first year, I wasn't really acknowledged as his girlfriend. I was acknowledged as his friend. So, oh, this is Jackie, my son's friend. So that kind of started, I think, like a whole other layer of me being invisible to begin with. It wasn't like she was super proud. It wasn't like, oh, this is Jackie. And, she's this, it's more like, oh, this is my son's friend. And let's move on. Let's talk about something else. So, me being hidden from the very beginning as to who I really was, why I was here, why am I living in your home, all those things just were very, we don't talk about that, much like divorce. So it's just everything is just so quiet. They're not very outspoken. They keep to themselves, but they talk amongst each other, which is just not something I'm used to. I come from a family of four. We're a small family, so we talk about everything. We talk about the day, if we have an issue with someone in the family, we say something. We don't talk behind you and around you, which is one of the cultural things I feel like is still happening all the time, because that's just what they're used to. They're not very used to confrontation, even within the family. So,
Sure. Yeah. So I'm getting like an undertone of almost like embarrassment or shame
mhm, mhm.
around a situation that isn't like the ideal, that is either expected or set as like the norm. Is that kind of how you felt?
Yeah, very true. And they're very image conscious. I mean, in Chinese culture, they just care so much of what people think about them. And they don't have to be like celebrities or anything. It's just within like the neighbors, what are the neighbors
Right.
going to think? They just are very, very image conscious to the point where I think it's offensive, for me anyway. So my experience of it was offensive. So I think everything was, now that I look back and I can talk about it, I see very clearly how things unfolded. Slowly but surely it did. Other things like cultural differences, another major one I feel is the relationship between the children and their parents. Now, if you're from an older generation and there's one woman in the household and that's the mom, and she's usually the leader of the pack. That was very much like that for my situation, my marriage. My ex-husband was not a stand-up kind of guy. In other words, he was very afraid of his mom and very afraid to, cross her in any way, even if it's a matter of opinion. He wouldn't have one. So in my podcast, I had mentioned a few times where her and I would have friction, and his solution was go work it out with her. Like, I don't want to get involved.
So telling
So
you, like, you go work it
you
out. Like,
you go
I'm
work
not
it
going to
out
be
with her.
part of
Like,
it.
I'm
Yeah.
out. So, and that, I think from a marriage standpoint, when two people come together, you want to stand by your lady, or you want to stand by your wife and your husband. So if something, happens within the family, you got to stick together to some degree. He never stuck by me, not even once. So I
Right. So
was pretty
that
much,
team feeling was
yeah,
kind of absent.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I
So
was
maybe a lack of support
lack
you
of
felt.
support.
Yeah.
So it's
Sure.
like I'm on my own, basically. Like, if you want to challenge my mom, if you want to talk to her about this, whatever you're unhappy about, then, go for it. If you really feel like if you're upset about it enough, that's basically his tone, then say something. If not, let it go.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's a,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those things. Those are, those are intimate details. And as you said, the family and the people involved may not be comfortable sharing those things. For you to come out, it must kind of feel like a relief, and you're being like brave and courageous, because it's kind of frowned upon, right?
I feel relief and more of the, I understand my situation even better. Because there's nothing worse than if you were to break up and you don't really understand why. You don't understand what happened. And that's kind of the hardest thing to accept, I think, when something ends, whether it's a friendship, a marriage, just a relationship, dating. If you don't know what happened, it's really hard to move on from what happened. If you just don't, if simply don't know what happened. So
Yeah.
talking about it, going through my podcast and kind of walking down memory lane on my own, you start to feel a little bit better about everything.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I have a coaching program called Wake Up from Your Breakup, and the whole point of it is to process your experience because unfortunately, I think in our society and probably lots of societies around the world, people see breakups and divorces as just something that they have to like get over or just move on from. But it's so crucial that we take the time to process what happened, understand it, and so we can get even more clear about what our role was in the whole process and what our partner's role was, because ultimately we'll most likely continue our patterns until we take the time to really reflect and process. And so it sounds like you've been able to do that, but it's taking you like a few years, right? It's not like it's something that you just wake up and realize.
No, not at all. You definitely realize more and more, and you just get better at healing. You're able to better handle, I think, for me in particular, my kids. Um, like till this day, my ex-husband can't even say my name. He doesn't call me by my name. His family calls me that woman.
Oh my
Or yeah, they don't refer to me by my name. So they've definitely not taken the steps to figure out where their mistakes lie in the entire relationship that we had in the process of the divorce. They haven't done the work, in my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah.
Um, but that's an individual thing. You have to, whenever you're ready. It's like anything else, like losing weight. You have to be the one willing to do the work. Until you want to do the work, it doesn't matter how many people talk to you. It doesn't matter about anyone's opinions. Until you're ready to do the work, nothing's going to change. So that's something for them they need to work on. I'm doing the work because I want to feel better. I'm in another relationship. I want to be, healthy, whole, happy. And then I want, my kids I have them every other week. So I want them to get the best of me when I do get to see them. So.
Yeah, so good. So tell us, because that kind of leads to the transition of when you were in it and you felt like you had to kind of keep hush hush and you were just kind of like sliding things under the rug as each red flag started to come up. And so it must have been really challenging for you to make that final choice, that decision to leave the marriage and leave the relationship, because you two still really loved each other and cared about each other. It's not like you had some big, explosion happen, or that, one of you was cheating on the other, or that I know of. But so how did you decide to make that choice? And then how did you cope with leaving and then moving forward? Like, what strategies did you use?
Um, well, as things were starting to be revealed to me through me talking to my attorney and just learning, as I would advise any woman to do, it's like asking questions. It's not just asking your husband question, ask someone else questions, learn through other people, talk to an attorney, just, ask questions. So as I was learning more through discovery, I learned the truth about the ownership, all that kind of stuff. And none of that is basis for divorce. Not even his drinking, which I had talked about in a podcast. I wanted to help. Marriage is about sickness and health, and you don't just decide to give up just because someone has a health issue. Of course not. But, I didn't see that part getting better, and he didn't want help. He just kind of spiraled. So, there were three main factors that I thought about, and one of them was, is his drinking going to get better in 3 years? Let's take 3 years' time. My kids were 7 and 4 at the time. So the decision process I used is time. In 3 years, my kids are going to be older. So in 3 years, do I think his drinking is going to get better based on what I saw and what his response was to me? No. Do I think I'd be able to forgive him for what he did in 3 years' time? Probably not if I was still living in that house. And third, do I think that, things between us are going to get better with my ex-mother-in-law and just the entire situation? The answer was no for all of those questions I asked myself. So asking questions isn't just with other people, it's with yourself. You have to be brave enough and strong enough to ask yourself the hard questions first. If you can't ask yourself those questions, I don't think you are really able to ask anyone else questions. So I asked myself those three hard questions, and the answers were very clear to me. And the tipping point for all of that was when I was served those documents telling me to leave. So that was my indication from him that you don't want this anymore, because you would have fought a little harder. You would have talked to me, try to work it out, go to counseling, anything to kind of work it out. And I was honestly willing to do any of those options. But I guess the deciding factor for me is when I was served that document and told to leave within 30 days. So I said, okay, if this is really what you want, then I'll figure out how to live with it and then move on.
Right. And it's a very important point that a relationship obviously is two parties involved. And so you can only do so much. You can only do so much, even if you're giving 120% of your energy, your attention, your time, your own personal development work. If the other partner half isn't willing to be doing those things or isn't all in, then I think, like you said, that's an important kind of flash of light in your direction to tell you, well, maybe it's not the best to stay together, or maybe it is going to be better, especially when I look down the road into the future of where will we be in 3 years? And of course, anything can happen. We never know the future, but
Yeah.
I think that's a very kind of logical step that you took. And you had told me before that obviously you probably dealt with lots of emotions going through all of this, probably a lot of inner turmoil. And so you decided to kind of focus on your children to help you manage all of those things. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Of course. Well, I was very hurt, obviously, very disappointed. I did my fair share of crying, and I was sad, and all those things that everybody's supposed to feel. I went through all of that. I just chose to do it in a different way. I chose to not show those emotions in front of my kids, because I just felt like, one, I didn't want them to see me so broken. And two, the comeback from that for me personally would have been harder. So if I went one way and had to fight my way back to get to the other side, that for me personally would have been harder. So I decided to take the somewhat not high road, middle road, and work from the middle up versus from the bottom up. And I focused on my kids. I gave them all my strength, all my energy, and thought of them first. So, yes, divorce is not great when it comes to kids. And a lot of people stay as a very individual decision for their kids. Me personally, I felt like if I stayed for my kids, again, 3 years from then, all those questions would be the same. And they would be older. And I was contemplating, things are just better done if they're younger. If I inevitably saw it would be the same 3 years later, then they would be 3 years older and it would just be harder. And then within the 3 years in that household, I don't want them to see the negative energy, the lack of love, the fighting, and all the bad stuff that they'll remember, and I can't erase. So I didn't want to even start that in their memory and give that to them only to try to take it away and try to cover it up. I just avoided that entire scene. And just when I left that day, they saw me. I was normal mom. I kept my head held high. I didn't cry. I didn't anything because I didn't want me leaving to be the worst thing ever for them, even though it felt like that for me inside. I didn't want them to remember that. Mommy's going somewhere else for now. We'll figure it out. And hopefully in time, everybody will end up adjusting to the new normal, basically.
Yeah. And something that you had told me before about this was that you really showed up for your children as the mom and person that you wanted to be, not the person that was how you were feeling in the moment. And I think that's one important thing for anybody in a challenging situation is when you are focusing so much on the pain and the hurt. And of course, you are going to feel it and you do have to process your way through it. But when you can focus on who you want to be and where you want to be, I think that it gives you that forward progress open door, as opposed to keeping yourself rooted and stuck in the past and what happened and all of the negativity. And so you truly embodied who you wanted to show up as for your kids. And so, luckily you had them to help you in that process. But I think that's an important piece to acknowledge.
Yeah. Have you ever heard the saying, dress for the job you want, not the one you have?
Yeah, that's a really
Kind of
great way
like
to put it.
It's kind of like that. Be the person that you want them to see you as eventually. I'm working to get there. But what I want them to see is the one that they'll end up getting, not the one that will end up changing over and over until she gets there. So I just tried to dress the part before I acted the part, basically.
Yeah, but putting all of your energy and focus on that role that you wanted to be, it led you in that direction, even if it was
Yes.
just like small increments every day,
Yeah.
right?
You end up becoming the person that you decide you want to be. You just have to decide, make the decision that this is what I want, whatever that is for that individual person. But make the decision first so you have something you're working towards. You're walking towards something. Who am I going to be? What am I going to do? And you're walking towards that. So you have some direction because when we break up, everything seems confusing. Everything seems lost. You seem hopeless and you feel like you have no direction. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? So giving yourself that direction up front, I feel definitely helps guide you the rest of the way, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And you were focusing on your own identity as an individual. And I think what you said, a lot of people feel lost when they come out of a partnership because so much of their own identity had been previously merged with the other person. And so when you can focus on your own identity and bring yourself back to who you are, who you want to be, it definitely helps that forward momentum. So, Jackie, what would you say if people are considering hopping into a new relationship, or maybe they're even going through a breakup now and considering a relationship in the future? What would you suggest or invite people to consider asking as like the most important questions before you get involved?
I would say one is don't necessarily carry the negative stuff to the new relationship, but also look at all the stuff you were missing from the first. What were you not getting? What was making you unhappy? What led to the ultimate breakup or divorce? And see if, honestly, I made a list. I literally sat down and put things down. So do what helps you, but ask yourself and ask for those things that you were missing in the other relationship first. If you can't get the things you were missing that you clearly needed and wanted and wasn't getting, ask for that in the next relationship first and then everything else.
Yeah,
So
I
that
mean,
way,
essentially, you're saying that, you're learning from your past
learning.
experiences, right?
Mhm.
Like what you missed before, you're certainly now going to bring to the table the next time around. So again, it comes back to that self-reflection, right? What have I done in my past relationships? What did I miss? That way I can assess that kind of front and foremost before going into the next one.
And it doesn't have to be anything big. It could be simple as one day a week, I need an hour, 2 hours of me time. Now, if that means that you're going to go get yourself a massage, if you're going to maintain your manicures and pedicures, because those little things, those day to day, week to week things bring joy. And make sure you include the things that bring you joy. Like I remember my ex sister in law. I get manicures and pedicures a lot, and I never gave that up throughout my entire marriage relationships. I always did it every other week. And she asked me one day, she goes, "How do you have time to go get a manicure and pedicure with kids?" You have to make time. You have to ask yourself, what brings me joy? Because it's all the little things really at the end of the day. So manicures and pedicures bring me joy. So I make sure to find a way to incorporate that into my time, my relationship, and make sure you carve out the time for yourself, whatever that is.
Yeah,
Whatever.
and I think a lot of people struggle with that in loads of different ways. Maybe for some
Mhm.
people, that's their exercise regimen. Maybe for some people, that's taking time to read or journal or just do anything, like you said, that brings you joy. And it's such an important piece. And when you're in a supportive partnership, and you express that is important to your happiness, then that other person is most likely going to want to help you achieve that, right? Like, okay, well, you need an hour to get your mani-pedi. Like, I can definitely take the kids, to the park on Saturdays or whatever you arrange. Do you find that you have this more like supportive model in your current healthy relationship?
Absolutely. I made sure that I didn't put myself second. And that's not to say it's all about you or it's all about me. It's just everybody has a piece of you. You should still have a piece of you too. So I made sure I kept a piece of me and whatever that is. Mine is now yoga. I make sure I do my yoga every day and manis and petties. That's still the same.
Perfect.
Nothing's changed.
Yeah, that
So
sounds fantastic.
those are the two things that I always ask, and I never have to ask because it's already there. It was upfront. It was something that I included as something to know about me, getting to know me. And it's never something you have to work in because it's already in. Just
Right. And
be
you don't
open
have
to
to
it.
feel bad about it either,
You don't
or
have to feel bad.
guilty or shameful.
Yeah, sometimes he'll remind me, he's like, "Aren't you due for a mani-pedi?" I'm like, "Oh, you're right. I need to go get my mani-pedi." So, if it's a part of your life, it'll be a part of theirs. Just remember that. But it's up to you to tell them what you need. Don't expect anyone to read your mind or assume things like that. Just say so. And then it's a one-time thing. You say it and it's done.
Yeah. And I think for you as well, it came down to you really finding your voice, because I think you probably kind of just went along with a lot of things in order to not make waves. But now, once you can have that time to reflect and feel more confident about knowing yourself, it's easier to kind of stand up for the things that you know you need and make you happy.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. So you are a podcaster and you talk about your story. Do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast so people can check it out and get the details of everything we're talking about?
Sure. It's A Quiet Divorce, and it's available on all platforms, Spotify, Apple. And it's really kind of, I called it a quiet divorce because everything about my marriage was quiet, even the divorce. And my podcast is the opposite of quiet. So it's very revealing, it's very honest, and I tell you all the good and all the bad. So it's me sharing my story, a modern tell all of my relationship, my divorce, my rebuild, how I rebuilt my life back, how I just got my sanity back, and helping and empowering women to do the same in whatever stage of relationship you're in, whether you're just now dating, living together, married, divorced, all of it. All of it's important. Every part of it, every stage of it is important, and we can all learn from each other. So I'm just going to start with myself, learn from me, and I'll learn from you.
Yeah, and I think there's so much to be said for people such as yourself sharing your personal stories, because there are going to be thousands, if not millions, of people who can also relate and feel connected in those experiences. And so if you're connecting, someone comes upon it and they're struggling, just even knowing or hearing that you went through it, how you got through it. It's just like uplifting and motivating. So that's why I do these interviews as well, is I think that there's so much to be learned from each other's stories and each other's experiences. And let me just tell all of you listening, Jackie, I've listened to a bunch of her episodes and she has the best storytelling voice. You'll just kind of find yourself like being lulled into the story. And so I encourage people to check it out. And Jackie, you are also a baker. I think that's what you're kind of known for on Instagram. So if people want to check out your work, and because you photograph your baked goods, so if people want to check that out and they're interested in that, where can they find you?
Sweet underscore burger SF. That's my IG account. And then of course, Quiet Divorce on all platforms. I am working on my website, so that'll be up in about probably December. And that the reason I'm starting the website too is because I want to start the conversation about my stories, about your stories, and anyone that wants to share, comment, and kind of understand a little bit deeper into my podcast. I try to be as informative as possible in a very short amount of time because I value everyone's time. But if you want to learn more and have questions and kind of want to talk about more, that's what my website will be for, to have chats and live conversations and things like that.
Oh, that's so exciting. You're building your own like community, which is so nice. So thank you so much for coming and sharing all of those stories with us and those tidbits of advice and tips. Guys, if you liked this episode, please share with someone else who you think would also find it interesting. Remember to subscribe to the channel so that you get updates on our newest interviews, and we've got some great ones coming up. So I will see you next time. Thank you, Jackie.
Bye.